Hello, 5th and 6th grade. This is your last ever history video. 314 and 315. We'll talk about the decline of feudalism. You have 3 pages to do, 230 to 232, mostly a, what do you call it? You know that thing? Yeah, that review, whatever we call it. All right, anyway, that's what you're going to be doing. And so we'll start reading here. There were a number of things that contributed to the weakening of feudalism in medieval Europe. First one, politics. Legal reforms such as Henry II's use of trial by jury gave more authority to royal officials. More authority for royal officials meant less power and authority for feudal lords. Famine and plague. Medieval Europe had grown and prospered during the 1200s, but the following century brought struggles that contributed to its decline. A famine resulted after too much rain during planting, and harvest time caused crops to spoil before they were ripe. Excessively cold winters added to the difficult environment. Disease and hunger claimed the lives of people and animals. It was during the 1300s that the Black Death spread throughout Asia and into Europe, killing more than 40 million people in Asia and about 25 million people in Europe. Now, you're talking about a time when they did not have the billions that we have today, so that was a tremendous part of the population. The famine and the plague weakened Europe's feudal economy. Fewer people meant fewer workers. A reduced workforce could demand higher wages and better conditions. Although feudal lords tried to put legal limits on these demands, they still lost much wealth and authority through the population declines of this period. War. This century also brought a series of conflicts between England and France that together became known as the 100 Years' War. These conflicts weakened feudalism in both countries. As a result of the conflicts, power shifted from the feudal lords to monarchs and common people. English monarchs used tax money to build large, expertly trained armies skilled in the use of the longbow. They also had cannons that fired iron balls to assault castle walls. They no longer depended on feudal lords to provide knights for battle. Peasants gained a sense of national loyalty above the loyalty they had previously held for their local lords. Development of towns. Another important factor in the decline of feudalism was the growth of towns in the 11th and 12th centuries. Increased food production from new farming methods allowed the population to grow. Not all the people were needed to work the land, so many moved to towns. As trade again increased, merchants needed places to sell goods, so towns grew up at key points along trade routes. Because they were not lords, knights, or farmers, townspeople did not fit into the traditional feudal social structure. Though many towns were originally controlled by feudal lords, townspeople began to insist on having charters. These documents gave townspeople freedom from many of the work obligations that were required of peasants on manors. Many townspeople became part of the newly developing social class, the middle class. The middle class was composed of people such as merchants and bankers. Although they did not own large pieces of land like the feudal lords, they were becoming wealthy through business and trade. In time, members of the middle class began to surpass some of the lords in wealth. The middle class often preferred one central government over many feudal governments because there would be fewer taxes to pay on trade. All right, and our last page. The Renaissance at the top there is talking about was a period that began in Italy about AD 1400. The word Renaissance means rebirth and refers to the rebirth of learning. The growth of trade and the rise of towns and cities in the later Middle Ages led to the expansion of a professional class, people who worked as merchants, bankers, lawyers, etc. These workers needed training. While most medieval learning had been related to the church, programs of study sprang up during the Renaissance to prepare people for secular work. These new programs looked to the classical world for examples of things such as how to draw up a contract. In the process, scholars rediscovered many works of ancient authors that inspired a period of great cultural change. This cultural revival spread north and into other parts of Europe over the next 200 years, greatly changing European life and culture. Classical Greek and Roman literature were widely studied, and universities developed. As a result of this revival of classical education, the arts also flourished, based on models of the classical world. Now to the Crusades. By the late 1000s, most of the Byzantine Empire had fallen to Muslim invaders. The Pope called for Western Europeans to join the Byzantines in a crusade to recapture the Holy Land from the Turks. This crusade was the first in a series of religious wars between the Christians and the Muslim Turks. During the Crusades, Western Europeans were exposed to many new ideas. They came in contact with other civilizations and cultures. Western Europeans returned with a broader knowledge and richer culture. They began to implement what they had seen and learned. The Crusaders brought back goods such as spices, cloth, and sugar. Their world was made bigger with the knowledge of how to build better ships, a development that contributed to the coming age of world exploration. Trade with other civilizations grew. The Crusades did much to weaken the system of feudalism. Fighting was expensive. Most of the money was provided by individual lords. Some lords had to sell or mortgage their properties to pay for their crusade expenses. Many serfs left their manors to fight in the Crusades. Most who left, having experienced freedom, never returned. The Great Schism. During the late 1300s, a disagreement called the Great Schism divided the Western Church. The argument was about who was the true pope. The Council of Pisa's failed attempt at resolving the problem resulted in the election of 3 popes. Eventually, the Council of Constance met to find a solution. The bishops elected a pope that the members of the church would approve of, ending the Great Schism. But the church faced other problems. European kings grew powerful and started to question the pope's authority, and people became intolerant of the riches and dishonesty of the clergy. Some longed for a truer form of Christianity. A time of transition. By the year 1500, central governments all over Europe were run by kings. England and France were becoming strong nations. More and more people were living in towns and cities rather than on manors. Most of the medieval world's culture had faded into something different. Changes were taking place that would usher in a new era in Europe. Universities began to form in cities where prominent teachers lived. Scholars were no longer confined to monasteries or church-sponsored schools. A revival of learning was beginning that would sweep across Europe and result in new discoveries and accomplishments. The modern era of history was about to begin with a cultural revival known as the Renaissance. Scholars and thinkers were also beginning to question the teachings and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. Their efforts to return to the teaching and practices of Scripture would eventually lead to the Protestant Reformation. All right, well, that's it, and I hope you have a good summer. Now that history is about done, we have, of course, a quiz today. Had a quiz today, have a quiz tomorrow, and we have a test the day after tomorrow on Thursday, and then it would be it for history then, unless you have missing assignments that you need to turn in. So, all right, that's it. Have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.